crash course in it. Pretty nerve-wracking. Yeah.
So it shouldn't wait till the day before.
I'm just saying, it's not too much. You want to, good use it.
You all here. My name is Jean Murray. I'm the staff attorney at Vermont Legal Aid. Diaz on the screen there worked at Vermont Legal Aid, and he authored this report, Kicked Out, that was a year ago, to bring to people's attention what is happening in terms of kids being suspended and expelled from school. And so the folks here in Brattleboro wanted a community forum to talk about these issues in this community. And so I'm going to turn it over to Mel Motel from the Just Schools Project. She's going to moderate our panel here.
Great, and I will turn it back to Michaela, and then back to me again.
Hi, I'm Michaela. I help organize this panel. I'm the diversity coordinator for WSESU.
My name is Mel Motel. I'm the director of the Just Schools Project based out of Brattleboro. A big thing that we do at the Just Schools Project is we train people in middle and high schools to implement restorative practices in their schools to both build community and respond to harm in ways that don't remove students from the school as much as possible and engage students in dealing with harm that comes up. So I'm really excited to be here today and be one of the people coordinating this panel. I will actually not be talking about restorative practices at all because I'm the moderator, and a couple of people on our lovely panel will be addressing that, I'm sure. A lot of cool things are going to come up today. So before we turn to our panel, before I introduce our panelists and we get started, I just want to give people an opportunity to talk to each other a little bit, because after that you're not going to talk for like 45 minutes, so now's your time. So as Jean mentioned, the report that came out a year ago that we are really going to be focusing on tonight and sort of springboarding from is called Kicked Out, Unfair and Unequal School Discipline in Vermont Public Schools, authored by Jay, who's on the screen over there. So unfair and unequal is one of the key concepts that we'll be talking about tonight and our panelists will be addressing. So what I would like to do is to just take a couple minutes, turn to your neighbor, perhaps introduce yourself if you haven't met yet, and I want you to talk about what does unfair and unequal school discipline mean to you? When you think of that, what comes up? So what does unfair and unequal school discipline mean to you? So find a neighbor, talk for a couple minutes, and then I'll bring it back. Hi.
I'm just the rookie in town, so I hope that I can listen and learn a bit tonight at John. Yeah.
I'm not an educator, and I never have.
That's really good.
Provide all of his.
She's just singing your praises over here.
What's that?
Sounds like there are a lot of
Singing your praises
amazing
over
conversations
wow.
happening.
I don't know. She's also wonderful. Oh, Rosie, maybe. Oh my goodness.
Great. So I want to give you a little bit, well, first let's hear if people want to share, maybe 2 or 3 people, what came up in your conversation. What does unfair and unequal discipline mean to you? Yes, Jean.
Lack of due process.
Lack of due process, what do you mean by that?
So somebody's having a bad day in school and the principal says, go home.
Mm-hmm. And they don't get to go through some kind of process to be able to deal with that and decide what the best thing to do is.
They don't get told what the facts are that led to the offense. They don't get a chance to tell their side of the story. They don't get their parents involved. Just go home.
Just go home. Thank you. Anyone else? John.
I had a little bit different take on about what is unfair. That would be like a punishment that is way out of proportion to the offense.
Punishment out of proportion to the offense.
I have one that, that not all students are treated equally, and the example that comes up for me a lot in my work is around gender, and I hear so much about dress code and unequal, and how to deal with dress code and sort of unequal punishment.
And who's impacted by those dress codes in a way that's,
Yeah.
So the idea that not everyone is impacted equally by these rules. In fact, there are some groups like girls that are negatively impacted more than other groups by the discipline. Yeah.
I
Sharon.
would just add to that people, not everyone experiences the discipline the same way as well, depending on their experiences and their identity.
Mm-hmm. So like who, can you give me an example or expand on that a little bit more?
Yeah, I mean, if a kid from a low-income family is sent home, they might not be sent home to, their parents are probably working. They're not sent home to a house where there might be someone to engage with them in the conversation about what's going on. They're more at risk of, being exposed or getting in trouble in other ways. Whereas a kid from a family whose parents might be home when they get there and can process with them and be a part of the experience of the kid.
So even the situation after the student leaves the school is different depending on people's economic situation or other factors.
Exactly.
Yeah. One more?
It's unfair in the way that if I'm the person who's causing harm and I'm just taken out of the classroom, or I'm not given the opportunity to learn how to be accountable and to sort of build my communication skills and actually take responsibility for harm that I have caused.
Yeah, and that relates a little bit to what Jean was saying about due process. How do we create a space where kids can actually have a process to look at the impact of their behavior, understand how it affects people? Yeah, excellent. So the way we are going to do this is I'm going to ask 3 questions. Each panelist is going to get a chance to answer one question, then they're going to get a chance to answer the second, and then the third. Then we are going to open it up to all of you to ask questions and have a conversation after the panelists get to share. Okay? So the way I'm going to do this is I'm going to, since the first question is for you to introduce yourself, I'm going to say the names, and then you guys can give some more context. So our panelists today are Jay, who's on, Jay, are you in Montpelier today, or Burlington?
I'm in Williston right now. That's where I live, and so I came home early, took care of my newborn baby for a little bit, and now I'm in, so I apologize I can't be there in person, but I'm glad I can be here in some form.
And you have Jay, we have Shenise, Mike, Judge Katherine Hayes, or Kate Hayes, Mary Ross, and Karen Cribari, and I am going to let them talk more about themselves. The first question is, please introduce yourself, what school or organization you're with, your role there, and what brings you here today. So we are going to start with Jay, and we'll follow it with Judge Hayes, Mary, Karen, Mike, and Shenise. So Jay, take us away.
Thank you, and I'm really excited for all of you to have come to this event and to talk about this issue. Hopefully everyone can hear me. Yes. Just quickly about myself, I'm a staff attorney, public advocate at the ACLU of Vermont. I used to work at Vermont Legal Aid and recently transitioned. We focus on civil liberties and civil rights issues in litigation and in policy work. So right now I am at the legislature advocating with many others to change school discipline law to make it more likely that kids will remain in the classroom, will remain in their schools when they would otherwise be kicked out for minor infractions. And that's where we hope to get started. I'm looking forward to talking to everyone about this issue and exploring it further.
Thanks, Jay. Judge Kate?
So we're just doing the intros now?
Yes,
okay.
Introduce yourself,
Good.
etc. Yeah, number one.
I'm Kate Hayes. I'm a superior judge. This year, starting in September, I've been in the criminal division court, but the preceding 3 years I was in family division. And I'm now into my 14th year. Of the 13 years that I've been on the bench, 7 of them were spent in family division courts. So I've spent a lot of time working with kids on issues that sometimes start in the school, sometimes are not connected with school, kids who are in court because their parents are struggling to take care of them, or because they are charged with having done something that wasn't quite right, a delinquent act, which might result in a criminal charge if they were adults, and kids who are truant, So I've dealt with all of those cases a lot, and in that context, I've gotten quite a bit of education about the impact of not being in school regularly, daily, week after week, day after day on kids. And the Vermont Department of Education actually did a training for all of the superior judges who sat in family court about a year ago that I think is relevant to these issues. So I'm going to talk some more about that in a minute.
Thank you. Mary?
Good evening, I'm Mary Ross. I'm a new member of the community. I serve as the assistant principal over at Academy School, which is a K-6 elementary school in town. I recently relocated with my husband from Michigan, and so I have the perspective of someone who is new to the area and intentionally relocated to Vermont, but also was an educator in Michigan for years and had that perspective as well. I was asked to be here today, and I'm grateful to be here. And my primary reason to be here is not necessarily as a representative of the WSESU schools, but as a person who cares for children and wants to make sure that we are doing what we can to keep kids in school and making sure that the reporting of that is reflective of what happens in our schools. And as I was fortunate to do at the beginning, before we began, I'm here to listen and learn this evening. So, thank you.
Thanks, Mary. Karen?
Oh, hi. Karen Cribari. I work for Youth Services, which is an agency serving youth and families of Windham County, although that's what brings me in contact with youth that are impacted by suspension. Primarily, I'm here on more of a personal level, like Mary, always been involved in trying to better the lives of young people. So BARGE program, it is a restorative justice program. I work with Judge Kate and I share a lot of clients, actually. CHIN's youth, they're the ones whose parents, they need some supervision. That's what that stands for, children in need of supervision. But anyways, getting the news of this report was exciting to me as it addressed a problem that I've been watching. It's plagued so many of the youth I've worked with since taking this position in 2008. It's a thing, on the one hand, they're supposed to be in school, but on the other hand, they can easily be asked to leave. And I think no matter what their situation is, that logic just doesn't add up to the youth, and they just sometimes give up. And I think that that's sad.
Okay, Mike?
I'm Mike Szostak, and I run our restorative justice program at BUHS. We have been doing this, running this program there for about 12 years, which is the longest running restorative justice program in a high school in Vermont, and I think one of the longer running programs in the nation in terms of using restorative justice in our school system.
Thanks, Mike. And Shenise, who are you?
So my name is Shenise, and I am a junior athlete at Brattleboro Union High School. I was invited here by Mr. Szostak. I've never actually done something like this before, but I thought it'd be interesting, which is why I'm here.
Thanks. Great. As you know, Jay, your report that you wrote is called Kicked Out, Unfair and Unequal Student Discipline in Vermont's Public Schools. What does unfair and unequal student discipline mean?
And I want to just thank all the members of the panel for being here as well. It's nice to see familiar faces. So what it means to me, among what people have already said, is I mean, to me, suspension and expulsion are actually inherently unfair. And that's because, for two reasons mainly. It's typically used not as a last resort, but it can be used as a first resort in a lot of instances. We'll just remove a student from the classroom or remove a student from the school building instead of finding a way to work with them. Now, that's not true everywhere, and that's not true in every instance, but it does happen, and it's unfortunate. The second reason is that the punishment doesn't really fit the crime. When you're talking about nonviolent, non-threatening behavior, you're not teaching anyone anything when you exclude them from the classroom. The only thing you're teaching a student who is suspended is that they don't belong in that classroom, they don't belong in that school, and they don't belong to the community. And I think that that's a dangerous path to put kids on. So that's what I think is unfair about it. And it's unequal in the sense that students from typically underserved communities across Vermont, and that mean students in low-income families, students of color, students with disabilities, are all male students even are all more likely to be suspended than they should be, and based on their numbers. So that's something we need to do something about. And the Agency of Education just put out a huge report with a bunch of new data from the last 3 years, and that said we have large overrepresentations of these categories of students being suspended. And so that's something we got to do something about.
Thank you, Jay. Judge Kate, what does unfair and unequal mean to you?
Okay. Well, from my perspective, what I want to do is I want to see kids not come into my courtroom. I don't want them in my courtroom ever. I think kids should be at home and in school. And the training that the Department of Ed did for us a couple of years back was focused on the fact that for years we had been removing children from homes, placing them in foster care, and immediately changing them from one school to another to fit the foster home. And there had been nationwide studies to demonstrate that those kinds of shifts from one school to another, and frankly the associated period, oftentimes a week or more, when they weren't in school at all while they tried to get them enrolled, were devastating to kids' long-term educational outcomes. That every time something like that happened, they would lose essentially 3 months of educational progress, even if it was only a few days, because of all of the social ramifications and the catch-up and so forth. Obviously, a short-term school suspension is something less than that, but it just that training really raised my antenna about this kind of issue and made it really clear to me that it's essential that kids stay in school if there's any possible way that we can keep them there. And I was also struggling because, frankly, the last couple of years, I've seen a pretty significant increase in truancies, long-term truancies. Kids on truant for a good chunk of the year, and in elementary school, middle school, and in high school. And it occurred to me that there is a significant disjunction there. Some of the other speakers have mentioned that kids are being told, you need to go to school, we're going to bring you to court and make you go to school, and your parents are going to get in trouble for not bringing you to school, and then some of those same kids might be suspended from school, told, okay, if you act out, here's a way that you don't have to go to school, which is what you've been trying to avoid. So I've had some dialogue with the local schools, and I know that there's statutory requirements that they limit the use of suspension to kids who really are putting other kids at risk or putting the school staff at risk. And I'm persuaded that they're really trying their best to do that, but I think we all need to work harder on that. It doesn't work to have kids get a mixed message, and I worry that the same thing, that when kids are seeing that if they act out they can avoid school, that it sends a very destructive message to the rest of our message, which is that education is essential to making it in our society, and that without it you're not going to be able to get a job, and you're not going to be able to progress in your life or be a productive member of our community. So I hate to see it being used. I really hope that we can all work together to try and find strategies to reduce it to the absolute minimum. And I've been hoping that we can do more school, court, and other social agency coordination on those issues.
Okay, Mary, unfair and unequal, what does it mean to you in this context?
Sure. I think when you react to a situation differently or in a disparate way, and it sometimes has to do with principles of justice. And I also think that I would agree with Judge Hayes that locally, and I can only speak to my experience at my school, I firmly believe that it is held as a very last resort. And when we do have those instances with children, in my experience, my school, the experiences that I have had have been communicative with the children, where we talk with them and we try to help it be a learning experience where they're understanding that for safety reasons, we are helping you through this process, and it's always taken very seriously by myself and I think by members of the school that I'm privileged to work in. And it's something that should be limited, obviously, especially for young children, for all children. Thanks.
Karen, unfair and unequal discipline.
I lumped them together. I didn't separate. Unfair and unequal, it's a way to describe having a preordained response to school infractions without taking into account the very individual situations of the student or the negative effect that removing a student can have. And I think the previous speakers have eloquently addressed all of that.
Great, thank you. And Mike, turning it over to you. Unfair and unequal school discipline, what does it mean to you?
My principal role on this panel is really to talk about what to do about it, because that's what I do. That's what our restorative program is about. And what unfair and unequal to me means not having a way to help. After all, we're in school, kids are in school to learn. And somebody once said to me, if you had a kid who couldn't do quadratic equation in math, would you give up on the kid if you were the teacher if they didn't get it the first time? And the answer probably is no. I would keep trying to find different strategies and different ways to be able so the kid could do quadratic equations. And I view the same thing when a kid acts out in some way in school. We have, in my view, the same obligation to try to find different ways to help this kid learn how to work within the school system that we have. And that's really what our program, our restorative program, is all about. I'm happy to say that last year we had 193 referrals to our program, which I estimate to be saved about 500, kept kids in school about 500 more days in total than they would have had we not had a program. Those are estimates because some of it you kind of have to guess at what might have happened, a lot of it. But again, to me, that says that what we're trying to do is to teach and to use this program to teach as opposed to having a kid outside of school. And I've heard people say, well, what's fair is to get the kid out of school so the other kids aren't interfered with in the school. And I have personally a real problem with that logic, because unless you're going to put the kid permanently out of school, if you let the kid back in school, then what good did it do to suspend them out of school only to have them come back in, had learned nothing new, and right back into the same pattern again? And probably it's going to be worse because the kid is in a downward spiral. They're behind in their studies, their teachers are frustrated, and it just gets worse and worse and worse. So again, to me, that's unfair because we're not teaching, and that's the unfairness about sometimes our system.
Thanks, Mike. And Shenise, I'm hoping you can talk a little bit from your perspective and your experience of times in school that you or people you know have been treated unfairly or unequally with discipline.
To me, as a student, unfair and unequal means having a consequence that doesn't necessarily fit the situation. For example, I've been verbally attacked in school before. It might have been my freshman year or last year, and I was told that I instigated it when I had nothing to do with it. I didn't know the people, and I was suspended for like a day. But when I came back, my other consequence was not being able to play in 4 of my games, which as a varsity player, that's crazy. And I felt like it was very unfair for me to be told that I instigated something that I had no idea that was coming up. So I also come from like a family, my brothers, who have constantly been suspended in school. Every single time they basically stepped in the school, they were sent out, which led to a lot of them considering dropping out and doing Vermont adult learning. Some of them did actually drop and came back, but being suspended, I feel like in-school suspension would have been a more beneficial thing to do, because that way you're still able to go to your classes and get work, versus outside of school it's a lot harder to stay with your class. That's my
Thank you. Before we go on to the next round, I'm wondering if, Jay, I can go back to you for a minute, if you would mind sharing some highlights of the findings from your report, because I realize that maybe would have helped set the context a little bit. Could you give us a minute of some of the key findings from the report?
Sure. I just want to say I'm really grateful that there's such a wide range of people on the panel, people who are involved in schools, and especially having a student, Shenise. It's really important to hear your story here, so thank you for being here. Quickly, the report looked at federal data on school discipline that all the schools in the state have to report, and what it found was that students, I think, lost 8,000 days of their education. About 4,000 to 5,000 students were suspended for at least 1 day. And students with disabilities and students of color were 2 to 3 times more likely to be suspended than their white and fully able counterparts. The students of color could only be analyzed for Chittenden and Franklin counties because of the numbers. It wouldn't be statistically significant otherwise, so that's what we found. We also found that school-related arrests and referrals to law enforcement, the policies around that and numbers were all over the place depending on where you went to school and what county you were in. For instance, Windham County, I believe, actually had a similar number of school-related arrests and law enforcement referrals as Chittenden County, but there's a huge disparity in the number of students. So that's just something to take note of. That there's this. It's really about policy, not where you are or necessarily what's happening in the school. Now, I should add that the Agency of Education did their own analysis over the last year of all of their data, and they actually found that there were more suspensions than I found over the last 3 years. And so it was more like 5,000 students suspended every year and losing about 23,000 days of education in the public schools. So it's not insignificant, and it impacts these students. And many students, that's just the number of students and the number of days. Many students are suspended for more days, and it's not counted. Many students are are suspended repeatedly, and it's not as well counted. And frankly, like Bennington County didn't even give us data. There like isn't a lot of data available from Bennington County, so there's some missing data. So I think it's an important issue to look at for all these reasons that have been cited so far. And it's something we got to do something about, frankly. Like, we need to make it a last resort, not a first resort, or even a second resort, because there's a lot of other things I think people on this panel could talk about doing before you kick a kid out of school, before you put that mark on them, before you make them miss a day of classes, have to try to catch up, miss time on at the games, not be able to participate in graduation, all these important markers of life. It's just not necessary all the time. So, we want to make the focus on safety. Like, let schools focus on safety, not disobedience or petty squabbles.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much for sharing that. And for people who are here, some of the reports are available that Jay authored last year on this table that you're welcome to take and that Jean brought. When Mike said 500 days, that using the restorative justice program, 500 days possibly were able to be spared from students being out of school, it reminded me of that number that you had of 8,000. And I thought it was really important to share that, and hearing your story, Shenise, and hearing the other people on the panel. It just seems so important to put it in context of what this looks like in our state, what the numbers are, what the disparities are. So yes, Jean.
I just wanted to add one thing to what Jay said. When the Secretary of Education studied this for the last 2 years, she found that 52% of the suspensions were for school policy infractions. In other words, there's a whole long list of things that you might get sent out of school for, like assault and battery and all sorts of bad stuff. And 52% of the times that people are sent out of school were for things like insubordination and disobedience. So that's a very shocking statistic.
So
yeah, the report really, and just to add a little bit more, the Agency of Education report said, something like, I think it was maybe like 2,000 elementary school students a year are suspended from school,
No, Jay, it was,
for at least one day.
That was one of the funny things I was sharing with my partner here, that of the 36,000 students who had been suspended, and that's in the 3 years, a third of them were 6th grade and under. So it was quite a bit. It was 8
and
12.
Yeah. So,
and finally, I just want to add that the reason Jean and I and so many people are here is because we see these kids. Jean and I have both represented kids in discipline hearings, kids who have been kicked out of school without discipline hearings for a variety of disciplinary reasons. We've done these cases, we've seen how it works in bad situations. We don't see the good stuff that schools do, obviously, because we don't hear about it. And there are good schools that do good work, and we've worked with schools to improve in a number of ways. I did a lot of work in the Burlington School District to get data, to improve practices, get better policies. So we're interested in supporting that work, while at the same time acknowledging that some places are not doing a good job on this and need to be doing better, and we need to hold them accountable for doing better.
So that being said, I might be asking you to be redundant in about 30 seconds, but we've spent the first round kind of talking about what are some of the issues as we see them and as we've experienced them around unfair and unequal school discipline. And the next round of questions is really going to be geared towards, okay, what works? What do you suggest? What recommendations do you have from your own experience, your own research, your own knowledge? What suggestions and ideas do you have for change? So just to keep us in the order, I am going to bring it back to you, Jay, and if you have any specific ideas or recommendations for change from some of those schools that you've worked with that are doing things that work, what can you share with us? And then we will go to Judge Kate, Mary, Karen, Mike, and Shenise again.
Sure, I'll keep it short. The schools do a variety of things. People I think are going to talk about restorative justice, peer mediation, just kind of a more graduated way of looking at discipline. more conflict resolution techniques, training teachers on de-escalation. There's a number of techniques, trainings. PBIS is a big one in Vermont that a lot of elementary schools use. So there's a number of tactics you can use. The primary one is to just not make it a zero tolerance policy. So don't say if you do this, you get suspended, no matter what. Let's make sure we look at all the circumstances of the student, understand their trauma history, understand any disability, any socioeconomic factors that may make things just more difficult for them, and find ways to work with them.
Thanks, Jay. Judge Kate, what ideas and recommendations do you have?
Well, the criminal division and the family division have been moving away from models that take kids out of communities and people out of communities when they commit offenses, and moving towards diversion, towards community justice center based solutions, and I know we have folks here from the Community Justice Center, and towards providing community supports, giving people who commit even really serious crimes circles of people to work with to try and make sure they can re-enter the community. I think a lot of those changes in policy and approaches in the criminal justice system and in the approach to delinquency make sense for schools too. And we're really talking about the same kind of conduct, the same kind of struggle for someone who's just not able or willing or whatever to conform to the norms and expectations of the place that they're spending time. Education is key, and trying to figure out what's going on is really key. And another thing that all of us in the judicial system have gotten a lot of training on the last several years is that trauma is a huge impact, especially for kids. Kids who've lived through extensive trauma, whether it was because of their parents' struggles or because they may have had serious injuries of their own or events that they've witnessed in their homes or just bad luck of a variety of kinds. They're affected by that, and it really affects their ability to behave the way that we expect them to. They're not bad kids. They're kids who are traumatized and they need help. And we're trying to make the courts trauma sensitive. Schools need to be trauma sensitive too. And suspension is probably not the right tool for a traumatized kid, hardly ever. And sounds like there's a lot of great stuff already going on, and I just hope we can continue to use the non-suspension based approaches to addressing discipline wherever possible.
Thank you. Mary, what suggestions or ideas do you have for change? Or what's working well that you have seen? Because you mentioned that there are some things that are working really well.
Yeah, thanks, Mel. In the same way that we want to be fair and equal, it's also important to recognize that every individual child is a unique person with a unique experience. And I'm really glad that you mentioned childhood trauma, because it is, when a child suffers trauma, it's pervasive in every part of their experience, whether it's in school or in the community or at home. And so when a child is in a place where they're struggling, when they walk through our door, at Academy School we have an extensive STEP program that helps teach. Mike mentioned what you do when a kid doesn't know the quadratic equation, and I'm not sure if I could say it for you today, to be honest with you. But you work with them and you teach them and you help them grow, and we've had a lot of positive experiences through our STEP program and through some of the behavior interventions, loosely based on positive behavior support interventions, but even going beyond that and seeing each child as an individual and working with them to meet their needs and to understand what they need in order to be a member of the community and to feel a member of the community. So I think that, in addition to our counseling staff, we really have had a lot of success.
Thank you.
Building on that.
Wonderful. How about you, Karen? What do you think? Ideas, recommendations, things that work? That
Running out of new thoughts.
I should have reversed it.
No, this is good because it's encouraging to be here among people. We did not rehearse or anything, but there's a common theme. A lot of the things I've seen, not all the kids that I've dealt with have been subject to suspension. And mind you, this is, there are 5 districts in the county that I work with, so I've dealt with kids, spread out in the county rather than just our town here. So my experience is it's broad, it's almost as broad as Judge Cates, that, but some of the things remain the same. Shenise touched on it, that, you've got, get a whole story. If something happens, got to step back a little bit. So maybe, less immediate. As I said in the beginning, not as much preordained. Find out, this is what we do in restorative justice. We get stories from each side and represent the community as much as possible, because we need to keep our people included, knowing that they are always part of the community, no matter what, and they need to know that yeah, maybe there's going to be a consequence. This happens, but they can better understand if they're keep a close eye on them, keep them close. I like the idea of conflict resolution. A lot of our kids come from homes where those skills are not prevalent. They're just not. And I know they teach it in the schools, and I know that people from a very early age, you keep your hands off people and all of this, but that's assuming that the child can even understand that. So definitely conflict resolution and as much restorative practices. I had a thought of screenings. The state is using a screening instrument now to determine which youth youth go to diversion. If they get charged at all, they might go to a pre-charge program, and it takes into account all these life domains, and definitely trauma is one of the questions that come up on that. So I don't know, if we could do that for everybody, but if you're an educator and you're in doubt and you would like a Yazzie pre-screen, give me a ring. I'll rush on down.
Thanks, Karen. Thank you. Great. And Mike, what recommendations do you have? What works?
In order to answer that question, I think there are 2 things that I always try to keep in mind. First of all, our society, what's the big picture of...
Mike, can you talk up? I don't think they can hear you.
Okay. You have to step back, I think, and look at the big picture in order to answer that question. In our society, we're a very punitive society. And the proof of that is we have 7.2 million people in our country, either somewhere under the control of the Department of Corrections. Mm-hmm. That's more than any country in the world. So we're a punitive society, and it's only natural and normal that the schools would follow that because we're part of the society. So that's part of the uphill battle we fight, those of us who are trying to change things in the school system, is what's happening really in the world around us. Secondly, let's face it, the heroes in the world, the people that get rewarded mostly, are the people who solve problems. The people who don't get rewarded are the people who prevent problems. And much of what we're trying to do, in my view, with the restorative work is prevent problems. And that's a hard thing to prove. It's a hard thing sometimes to get funding for. It's a hard thing to prove. There are 3 specific recommendations that I have to address this. One is to use the restorative practice as a model in the schools. And in our school, I teach kids how to use the restorative process to help their fellow students work through problems. I also go into the classrooms and try to help teachers embed the restorative practices actually within their own classrooms, which is more getting at the prevention side of things. So that's one recommendation I'd have. The second one is that we're also doing some work and social emotional type training, which gets at how do I control anger? How do I resolve conflict, not only with students, but with my teacher? How do I approach a teacher when I'm having a problem, as opposed to acting out? And so those basic social emotional skills need to be taught in the front end, preferably before they ever get to high school, but at least in our school, we're trying to do that with 9th graders. And thirdly, I'm now working with Dara and the Community Justice Center to try to put into place using volunteers, adult volunteers from the community, and which I'm going to refer to as a community-based circle of support, but to use community adult volunteers who are willing to work with kids who maybe who need that extra something. And I think we have people in our community who are willing to volunteer to work with kids and give them that extra support. So those are 3 specific recommendations that I would have that we're trying to do now in our school.
Thank you, Mike. And I'm going to turn it to Shenise. What ideas do you have for change or recommendations for making it different?
So going back to what Judge Hayes was talking about with kid trauma, I've experienced growing up things that kids should not typically go through, and I acted out throughout middle school nonstop. I was constantly suspended, and I just didn't really care at that point. And then freshman year, I also acted out until I got into restorative justice. And in my opinion, I think it's the best program that the school has. It's a lot safer. You feel safer at least. And a lot of students feel better going to restorative justice with a problem than the administrative. Your voice is like, everyone's equal in there. You're being listened to. You're not being yelled at or telling what you did wrong. And you get to come up with a solution together that you feel like you could be comfortable with. And I think that's a great thing that the students have, because now I don't act out. I get along with my teachers perfectly fine most of the time. And I get along with students better. You get to address your problems directly with the student and talk it out instead of resorting to violence, or when you tell an administrative or principal, things typically get worse. But restorative justice, it's calm and it just dies down. I think that's a great thing because it's definitely helped me a lot. It's definitely changed my life in school. I feel safer in school. I like going to school. I think a lot of students are lucky and very appreciative to have restorative justice and Mr. Szostak as someone to look up to. So,
thanks, Shenise. Thanks so much.
Can
yes,
I just
you
add one other thing
yeah.
In my remarks, that one of the things I think our school is doing that I think, again, there's pressure from society to punish. You want people to punish. If you don't punish, you're not doing anything. But one of the ways sort of around that, to still give maybe some pressure you get from the community to punish and still not do it, is to hold things in abeyance. And again, that's one of the things that we're doing in our school. In fact, I just worked on a case today, and it was a sexual harassment case where that kid, rather than being punished fully, some of the days of suspension were held in abeyance until that kid went through a restorative process. And if the kid went through it successfully, then they wouldn't be punished further. And I think that's really a neat way of handling things and still maybe satisfying those in society who say you just have to punish, so.
Thanks, Mike. Before we turn it over to the other participants to ask questions and come into the conversation, I do want to open it up for our panelists to have any last comments, because I think it's important to get a last word in if something someone said sparks something for you.
So when Judge Hayes talked about foster children, I had a lot of thoughts on that. My mom is a foster parent, and we've taken in these two girls who are also in high school, who's moved from different schools and communities multiple times. I know them personally, but what happened with them is now they went from Bells Falls to Holyoke to back, and now they're with us because, you know, when you're in foster care, you have to go to where the people who are fostering you are. And now they are credits behind of where a junior should be, so they have to work a lot harder than most junior students, and they struggle a lot more, and they're like very frustrated, and I just felt, I don't know, something that was very true.
Thank you for sharing that. Anybody else want to add final thoughts before we open it up?
I'll add one quick thing, if I may.
Grab a J.
It's okay. This is really just a shameless plug. You know, we have legislation in the House and Senate on this issue. It may not be perfect, but this discussion is happening at the legislature, and so I encourage anyone who's interested to contact their legislators about this issue. You know, whatever your thoughts may be, they need to hear from us, and they are interested to hear people's stories as teachers, parents, principals, police officers, students. I mean, they're interested to hear from everyone, and I think that the more people they hear from, the better they'll understand this issue and be able to craft a really, positive solution, hopefully giving some resources to our communities and our schools to do more of this good work.
Great. And Jay, can people contact you to find out more, or Jean, are you a good person to talk to?
Yeah, this sort of a little bit too late. I actually emailed all the legislators for Windham County and asked them to come tonight, but they are all up in Montpelier. But they know that we met tonight, and so the idea of how I would make change is change policy, and one of the ways to change policy is to quantify everything that's going on, so the numbers of, like, there is a problem. The second thing is to say, go to policymakers, which are the legislators, and say, if laws were a little bit more tailored to keeping schools safe and not just allowing principals to get rid of kids who are unruly, that would work better. So, and then the resources, which Jay was saying, restorative justice. I had a case in the middle of Vermont and central Vermont, and we tried to get the restorative justice person, and there was just not enough funding for restorative justice who was centered in White River to be over on the other side of the state. We need more resources, and even PBIS, the Positive Behavioral Interventions and Supports folks, need more resources. So quantify the problem, ask for policy changes, and ask for more resources, because it's an important issue.
Mary, did you want to say something else? I thought I saw your face.
Sure, I see your face. I guess I want to make sure, again, I represent myself, but I want to make sure that it's out there that I don't know that any of my colleagues consider suspension or expulsion a first resort. I think that I have had an incredibly community-based experience since I moved to Vermont, and looking at each and every person in the school as an individual and working to meet their needs in a way that I didn't experience in my home state, to the extent that I have since I've been here. And I want to make sure that, and Jay, you mentioned the good things that are happening in schools. And Jean, you mentioned the resources that can help with this, be it through positive behavior interventions and supports, through programs at our school like the STEP program, the great work of counselors and the great work of restorative justice practices, that in my building there is definitely not a prevailing sentiment that we would ever kick an unruly child out without consideration of the individual circumstance and who they are as a person. So, thank you for the opportunity to speak.
Absolutely. So let's transition by just giving a hand to our wonderful panelists. Each and every one of them. I want to open it up now for people in the audience to ask questions of the panelists, and because we are calling this a community discussion, it's a Q&A, but it's also an opportunity to just talk with each other. So it's not like we are the experts and everyone else here isn't. This is an opportunity for conversation. So unless I see a bunch of hands go up, I will just let people go ahead and talk. Curtis.
Great. Thank you for being here. My question is, are we operating on the false assumption that our educators are prepared to educate our students in a way that doesn't emerge the current data that we're seeing around disciplinary actions?
Are we operating on the assumption that our teachers are prepared to
educate our kids as they are?
Okay, to educate our kids as we are. Does anyone want to respond to that?
Oh, I would say that I think all of us, I know I'm included, I need more information about how to deal with folks with trauma. You know, and if I were in school trying to teach, I think that would be something I really want some continuing education on. How do I help the kid who is triggered by something that does not trigger the average person, someone who's not experienced trauma and who is going to act out? How do I deal with that? I'm not sure whether our teachers are getting that education. And being a teacher is a really, really tough job. I don't want anybody to come away from this thinking, I didn't get that, or that any of us don't get that. It's hard. And sometimes teachers need a break from kids, and kids need a break from teachers, but that doesn't have to equal suspension.
I see two hands, and also want to acknowledge that I know there are teachers in the room, so I want to open up to some of you all to respond to that
That
question.
doesn't surprise me.
Great. Go ahead, and then Anne.
Yeah, I teach at the high school, and I just, I want to just caution against an us versus them kind of tone, if possible. And I know a lot of people have been traumatized in school. I've been traumatized in school, and it's heartbreaking. And we all have a responsibility to make things better in school as much as possible. And school is part of a larger question of what's our society about? What do we value? You know, what is it that we need to teach our children? And so I think as somebody who, you know, I'm a new teacher, but it's when you're in front of 24 kids and 3 of them are being very loud, it's a very heartbreaking situation, you know? It's like, if even 3 of us were disrupting this meeting, we wouldn't have heard everything. We wouldn't be able to share the way we're sharing. And it's not a question of blaming anyone or pointing a finger. Everyone has a good reason for their behavior. But as a teacher, I feel a sense of responsibility. And like you were saying about people who really can't figure out how to meet the norm. It's not nothing wrong with that. It's kind of a crazy norm, you know, in a lot of ways. You know, we've all been sitting here. It's not good for us, you know what I mean? Whatever. So I don't blame the kid who can't meet the norm. But what's my responsibility to those other 18 kids? And just having that kid stay in the class, even though they don't want to be there, they're not able to listen, they can't sit still, they're making a lot of noise, they're not learning either. So if I can't figure out how to reincorporate them and take them in, well, of course they need to be somewhere, not out in the street, you know, but maybe not in the classroom either. I don't know. And when I hear you talk about, insubordination and discipline, it's a really, you cannot teach a class with 3 or 4 insubordinate and then disciplined kids. Like, it's a very hard thing to do. And so I really do wonder if those kids, is there a classroom for them? Is there a place for them, and maybe reintegrating and working and somehow doing that? But it's not nothing to be insubordinate in a classroom. It's really, your own education is compromised, and so is that of a large group of other people. And just one last thing, in terms of the us versus them, when I hear you say the principal is kicking people out, I look to my principal, who's sitting here with us, and I've seen kids yelling in his face, and the respect that he shows for kids and the patience. I just would really hope and urge you guys to realize that we in the schools are also bringing our hearts to this, and it's a hard, difficult challenge.
Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing that. I want to go to Anne. Anne, if you still want to share something, and then come back.
What's your name?
Angie.
Angie. I'm glad Angie brought up the point of the larger systemic issues, because I think things in education have changed a lot over the last, I haven't been teaching for 20 years, but I've been talking to teachers who have taught for the last 20 years. And I think the economic situation has gotten much worse, and capitalism is crunching people in a way that wasn't the case 20 or 50 years ago. And that has had a ripple effect. And, I don't think it makes sense to have one adult with 15, 20, 25, even 30 kids in a classroom. Like, that also doesn't make sense. Some countries have figured out, okay, we take the top college grads and put them in classrooms and put 3 of them in a classroom with a very small number of students, and that works much better. So we're working with a broken system, essentially, and trying to do the best that we can. And so it is kind of damage control when you've got, and kids have things to be mad about, they're forced to sit down and listen, and sometimes listen to things they aren't really interested in for a whole day and have very little exercise, and we know that exercise is good for the brain, so there's lots of things that aren't working effectively. So within that, I think we're trying to do the best that we can, and how do we make those human relationships? And I think there's lots of little ways, but also we can push for bigger change in bigger ways.
Thank you. Thank you for the teacher's perspective there on looking at the structural problems that exist and complicating the us versus them, or that it's so simple. It's actually really nuanced, and there's a lot of stuff that comes up every day for people that are in schools. So I know I saw your hand. Did you want to respond directly? And then Diana?
Just a really brief thing. I certainly didn't mean it's extremely complicated. What I heard a story the other day, which is kids who are disrupted in class is an office referral. And then what happens in that office referral is often key. And some schools don't have the resources to go through and make the best teaching possibility of the office referral. A friend of mine whose husband teaches in a high school, a year or 2 ago, they got a restorative practitioner who takes all the office referrals. And the kids work with that person and come back to class and behave. Whereas before, the office referral just ended up with the kid being madder or not being able to participate that day. So what I think is it's complicated. It's going to be an individual school solution, and it's going to take a lot of understanding of what exactly is going on and ways to work with individual kids. And so not to say that 18 kids should have to tolerate somebody being disruptive in class. That's not the idea.
Thank you. And Diana, and does anyone else want to be on the stack? Okay, Diana, and then maybe we'll see if our panelists want to respond to anything that's come up so far.
I'm just, struck by part of what you said, which was those 3 kids don't want to be in my class, and interested in this evolving legislation on personalized learning plans and how students are being put in a position of really, over the next few years, having the chance to really name what their interests are, what it is that their personal goals are, how they can maybe look at alternative ways to get content that gives them a well-rounded high school education. And I just would like that effort to be put on our list of solutions and best practice. And I've only been experiencing this on the younger level with more middle schoolers through trainings that I'm trying to organize that are effective and that link to that effort. But I can imagine in the high school where more intense attention is given to it, this is going to mean more and more regarding discipline because kids will be where they want and will be pursuing their goals in a more proactive way.
I want to, Curtis, response, and then I'll turn it over to the panel.
Right. So I wonder, we talk about triggers in the kid. What about the triggers in the educators? And to what extent are educators aware of where their triggers are, that a benign situation finds itself spiraling south when it could have been avoided if the educator was self-aware of the trigger itself.
So I'll open it up to the panel. Does anybody have any ideas about, I think Mike does, about teachers being aware of their own triggers and how they're impacted by a situation that might escalate for them? Yeah.
As I said, I've been doing this restorative work in the high school for about 12 years now, and I have more and more teachers, first of all, coming to me asking me to help them, which I think is a really good sign. I've had 70 referrals this year so far, and I don't have them with me to count, but a number of those are teacher-student conflicts. And what I try to do with those is to get the teacher and the student together, and I think address some of what you're saying, Curtis, at least that's what I'm trying to do, is not only talk about what does the student need to do differently to make this relationship work, but what does the teacher need to do to make the relationship work. And I'm finding more and more when I first started this work, it was really hard to find teachers who were willing to sit down and have that conversation. But I'm finding more and more teachers are willing to do that. And so I think things are changing. At least my view is that there's more receptivity for the teacher to look at what they can do differently as opposed to just the kid.
Yeah, I think it'd be a really interesting data point to track teachers that are referring folks for, to the outer classroom.
Yeah.
And I'm sure for every teacher that comes to you, Mike, there are 5 or 6 teachers who really need to be there too.
I don't know what the numbers are, but I see your point.
Jay, are you raising your hand over there?
Yeah, I just wanted to add that, when we talk about suspensions and expulsions, almost, uniformly across the state, that's going to be a school administrator deciding that. So teachers normally don't have the authority to suspend a student. They may have the authority to send them to like a planning room to do in-school suspension, but they don't have the authority. They usually will send them to the office. And I do think it's a great point that, our schools need to, and the people who work there and the students that go there need to understand implicit bias and should, be trained in that. And I think the agency of education in the state supports that generally, but the resources are lacking. But show me your budget and I'll show you your priorities. So, let's make that a priority for our schools and for our state.
Thanks, Jay. I see 3 hands. I'm going to go 1, and then Camille, and then Rosie.
Hi.
1.
Mr. Diaz told us earlier in this report that some 8,000 days were lost. And Mike mentioned earlier that some 7 million or so people are incarcerated. Somehow we move into that. Perhaps so many wouldn't be incarcerated if the schools didn't start the whole thing to begin with. Now, for those of you who don't know me, I taught mathematics at the high school for almost 40 years, and I'm now retired. I highly recommend it, by the way.
Math?
Yeah, right. Well, and one of the things that I never agreed with, and Mr. Diaz just said that teachers don't have the authority to suspend students. Unfortunately, we don't have the authority to not suspend them either. Something that I always objected to was the fact that if a student was suspended for something that they did somewhere else, they were taken out of my math class as well. I never think that anyone should be suspended from my class unless I was the one who had the problem and thought so. Why should somebody who mouths off four-letter words maybe somewhere else be taken out of math class where they weren't? And I could give you the names, I will not, but I'm not making this, let me say, I'm not making this up hypothetically. Students who were suspended from my class in April and May for 5 days and ended up flunking my class and everything else and dropping out of school when I was hanging on by a thread. They were not great students. I could even tell you one particularly. If I sat down with her and worked with her for a few minutes, she would do something. If I walked around the classroom and came back, she had done nothing since then. But we were hanging on by a thread. I mean a very little. Yet suspended for 5 days,
holding that thread.
You don't come back to that. There's no way. You know mathematics is sequential. You miss a day, 8,000 days. You miss a day in my class, you're out of luck. And if the student's suspended, they missed all of their classes. So a suggestion, I think, is that suspension should be done away with altogether. And I'll back off. I'll say, I know there are, a student threatens people, brings a weapon, something of that sort, a safety issue, okay. But there's no reason, punishment doesn't work. It doesn't work at the adult level, it doesn't work at the school level. The only thing, Mike can certainly attest to this, you've got to sit down with the student and try and straighten it out. You can't just throw them out for 5 days or whatever and think everything's going to be fine. It doesn't work.
Thank you.
That's what I think.
Thank you. Highlighting some of the connections between schools and prisons, and the fact that if a student is suspended because of something that happened somewhere else, that impacts you and your class as well. It impacts that student in all their other classes, especially the ones that are just hanging on.
Well, it was said before that you're throwing the student out of the community,
right.
And that's certainly true. You said that. And that's certainly true. And what I was saying is, yeah, you're throwing them out of the education as well.
Thank you. Thank you for your perspective. So we have Camille and Rosie, and then we might have to start wrapping it up soon with a couple final comments from the panel if they want to share. Camille?
Well, one of the things that really grabbed me that made me come tonight was that one of the things that really grabbed me and made me want to come tonight was the statistic that's shared in this report that students of color are suspended and expelled at a rate 2 to 3 times higher, and that just seems like such a example that racism is a Vermont problem, despite a lot of people's resistance to that reality. And just thinking about this, like the implicit bias piece of teachers and administrators coming in, and the capitalist and other larger structures that mean that there are like limited resources for students, for the staff to be working through that. I'm also wondering what what's the racial and ethnic demographics of the teachers and administrators are in this state in terms of like what kind of implicit bias predominantly white teachers in a predominantly white state are bringing into the classrooms and schools.
So you're wondering if, would you like someone to address the disparity, the racial disparity in who's being punished and how that relates to teacher demographics? Is that accurate?
Yeah, I'm curious if someone knows what the teacher demographics are.
Yeah.
I think they're about.
Oh, Curtis knows.
Yeah, they're like less than 30 teachers of color that are members of the Vermont EEA, and they have like 9,000 members in the state of Vermont.
So 30 out of 9,000. Abby?
Less than 30.
Less than 30.
What is NEA?
Vermont, the National Educators Association, the union.
Would every teacher be part of it?
Almost, not every.
Almost, but not everyone.
Mm-hmm. Does anyone else want to respond to that or have any particular comments on that besides the number? Abby?
What's the percentage compared to the population, if you know?
Well,
Just curious.
There's got to be someone in here that knows.
we were mathing that. 30 over 9,000 versus, yeah, whatever that number is.
Versus
It's less than,
It's less than 1%.
A third, yeah.
A third of a percent, and then a population of
5.1%.
5.1%.
You want the demographics of students of color enrolled in Vermont?
Yes, I was curious. And teachers, but
Well,
that sounds like
that
it's a
was the
third of a percent.
demographic for teachers of color.
So while we're figuring that number out, I would be interested if someone wants to go a little deeper with that and explain why that's an issue. When you say things like implicit bias, I've heard a couple people say it. What do you mean? Great. It's hard to see.
I'm gonna leave it to my
So
colleagues.
we're not all on the same page about that.
Mel, you know the answer to this too, so.
I'm the moderator.
So there's a
I ask.
It's a longer conversation, but I think what we know, or what the research shows, is that it's really, the way that implicit bias and unconscious bias works is that it's shaping the ways that teachers are creating curriculum, interacting with students in ways that they're not aware of, or that there's not a consciousness around. So, you know, I think the issue around recruitment and retention in the state is a critical issue, and I'm just sitting here trying to think of the name of this movie that talks about the experience of Black American students, particularly in independent schools, which is where I do a lot of my work, looking around to see that they don't have anybody who reflects their experience, because most of the teachers in independent schools are also white. So there's a lot.
Prep school Negro.
Yeah, thank you, that's it, yeah. So again, I think, you know, there's a lot to be said about it, but, you know, I think if we all think about places where we carry our unconscious bias, or the ways in which it shapes our interactions with students or colleagues, whatever the interactions that we're having, it deeply is impacting kids in schools, because the way that I as a white educator might be thinking about my curriculum is not the ways that it will meet the students of diverse populations who are sitting in my classroom. And so this is deeper work, and part of what I think about when I think about school climate is how that, you know, yes, and I was thinking what this young woman here who's representing BUHS is speaking of, is this idea that, you know, their experience, whether it's like a different cultural experience or a different ethnic, speaking a different language, their community, their cultural community thinks about education and the relationship with teachers in a different way. If we don't check some of the assumptions that we carry, then we're perpetuating, you know, a very white experience. And I think, you know, again, most of us are not doing this intentionally. But if we're not thinking about that and really checking ourselves around it, it's deeply shaping the experiences. And that's, I think, deeply connected to the disparities that we see of who is getting suspended and who's getting disciplined. You know, and I think we have to talk about that. I mean, we can talk about each child and see each child as a unique individual, but as a white person, I may be looking at my student from a different racial or ethnic background and not realizing that they see the world in a very different way than I do.
Thank you. So I appreciate the conversation. I have one quick comment, and I'll let the two of you figure out who's going to do it.
I also, like, 30 out of 9,000 is so absurd. There's more than 30 people in this room right now. Like, that's like, so I can't even let you know, like, that is, I've never heard that statistic before, and I cannot imagine what that experience would be like for a student of color or the 30 teachers of color that are in this state. That's such an absurdly low number. That's, yeah.
You know, does someone know what it is? Are there teachers of color in Brattleboro? One at our school.
Yeah. There's 3 in the high school and I think 1 in the middle school is what I know of. And
And
I don't know
one
about
if you count one more if you count paraeducators.
I was counting paraeducators.
And I think we have.
Well,
Oh, 2 at the middle
licensed-
school. Okay, good. I was counting paraeducators.
But licensed educators, not paraeducators.
That's
So,
important to say.
this is something to put on our parking lot, perhaps, to keep looking into. I see hands, but I also want to honor that Rosie had her hand up a while ago, and I want us to wrap up. So I'm going to go to Rosie, and we're ending at 7:30ish, but feel free to stick around and talk to each other. If the panelists want to stay here, we can come up here and talk with them, okay? But we want to formally close in a few minutes. Rosie?
If folks wanted to keep going with that discussion, I feel like
No, because that could go, whoa, that could go.
well, then I'll tailor my question to be along the lines of those things. So, I think I have a lot of thoughts. I've been thinking about this for a long time, ever since I was a angry high school student, known to throw books at teachers. And I got really lucky. So, and had some adults really invest in me, and it opened up opportunities that I never contemplated. So, so I've been thinking about this for a while, and I think what folks said about trauma and resources is so key, and I feel like also this just recent discussion is, I think, can also tie into resources because it's like, what resources are we investing in? Are we investing in resources that reach all students? And also, I think, and as teachers, I feel the frustration of teachers and the sort of weight of that, and that all of us who are state funded, from the schools to the courts to everyone, are always being asked to do more with less. And it's really hard, and you end up making decisions that aren't aren't the right decisions, but it's what you have. So, so I do really, I like that Jay talked a little bit about legislation, because I think all of these things, I work with Karen at Youth Services and her program, which is funded by DCF and is the only DCF program focused on teens and adolescents. It's the only funding source that DCF has in terms of services, and it's been on the chopping block for years, and is again this year, and I think probably in more peril due to the high rates of really little kids entering in DCF and them having to pool a lot of resources from other places to find that money. So I just encourage folks to really advocate to keep these resources alive, because you can't do something with nothing.
Thank you. Thank you, Rosie.
Oh, sorry, one
Yes.
question. Could folks familiar with the legislation, do you have the numbers of the bills off the top of your head?
It's S-194, which is to amend the school discipline, and H-796.
Say one more time.
S-194 and H-796. I'm going to check my number.
Companion bills, they're the same bill, both sides, right?
Well, they're not exactly the same, but they're pretty much the same.
So we're hearing about policy, legislation, implicit bias, restorative justice, ending suspension, so many wonderful ideas and experiences in just this short period of time. I want to close, and like I said, hang around for a little bit if you want and keep talking with each other. I want to give our panelists one more quick chance to just, if there's anything that you must share, go for it.
I just want to say I forgot to mention that HCRS is an important player and plays a significant role in most of our schools. There are in-school social workers in almost all of our local schools, and they're really, really important and key parts of keeping kids safe and schools safe and offering resources. And they should be part of the conversation too, if there's a larger conversation.
And also just that there are some structures in place in our school. Working with HCRS, we were able, through grant funding, to just acquire a new social worker to try to connect with families, because I don't think, I'm going to respectfully disagree that I don't think it starts in schools. I think sometimes it starts outside of school. And so finding ways to bring families together try to have success for children in school, because sometimes, as was mentioned, things come into the school and we want to try to help them as best we can. And also, in the same way as an administrator, in the same way that we spend time doing professional development with teachers, talking about sort of putting our time and our budget where our mouth is, we do a lot of work with behavior coaching with teachers, and we devote one faculty meeting a month with our behavior analysts, trying to help teachers hopefully feel more comfortable in more situations. So that work is ongoing and will continue.
And I'll give a plug for myself, actually. On March 11th at the Southeastern Vermont Learning Collaborative, that's in Dummerston on Route 5, I'm going to be giving a day-long 9 to 3 Introduction to Restorative Practices in Schools training. So if you're interested in that or know anyone who is interested, come to me. I have a sign-up sheet here for my monthly newsletter that talks about training opportunities and other things coming up around school justice issues. So.
Jay has.
And Jay.
Yeah, in addition to going to Mel's fantastic training in session, some other things, I mean, people can do a lot. This is a local issue as much as it is a statewide issue. And if people, just ask their school principals and superintendents, ask their school board members, what do they know about this issue? Have they thought about it very much? That's an important first step. Many people don't think about this at all. Many people in schools, it's just the way we've done it for a century, and so we just keep doing it, even though it doesn't work. And no study shows that suspension helps with behavior. So I think that it's, there are a lot of things people can do, and a lot of good resources out there. If you want to do something in your own school, if you want to do something in your community, or if you want to do something on a broader level as well. I think the goal with any of this work is really, I hear it's tough. We can't, solving poverty is a really difficult challenge, right? And solving racial injustice, discrimination is a difficult problem. We continue to work on those, of course. This is one small area where we can at least make sure we don't exacerbate those problems through our schools, which do have a powerful ability to change people's lives for the better. So again, I just want to thank everyone for being here and having this discussion. It's a fantastic one.
Thank you, Jay. So one more hand.
Sure. Since we're doing shameless promotion.
Yes. No shame. No shame there.
That for the last decade, Vermont Partnership has been training law enforcement around issues of implicit bias and fair and impartial policing. We work with municipalities, senior leadership around implicit bias, in Burlington, Rutland. We're a local resource. Use us, okay? Because this is what we do. When we leave Brattleboro, we have to remind people, don't judge the cobbler by the shoes he wears, okay? So that where other places around the state are doing really solid work around implicit bias, people always think that the work is really happening here in Brattleboro in really substantive ways. But it's not. So we're plugging. If you want it to happen in your school, in the school district, then give us a call.
Thank you. Any other shameless promotions? Or before I thank our panelists, I want to thank the Boys and Girls Club for hosting us here. I don't know if anyone from the Boys and Girls Club is here. Jean and Michaela for the collaboration. Is there anyone else we need to thank before we thank our panelists?
Everyone for being here.
Everyone for being here, for sure. And thank you to our panelists who are coming all the way from Williston to BUHS to be here with us today and have this really great conversation. So thank you.